Welcome to the Miami Heat Floor Crew, your weekly Miami Heat show brought to you by the Five Reasons Sports Network. I'm your host, Jonathan, aka Jonathan MMA. We got Marco, Gad, and Matt up in here. And, as always, what we do is we'll break down the last week of Heat basketball. We'll give you kind of some of the main topics that are maybe some of the primary things that the Heat team need to focus on, and then break down our predictions going into next week. And with the last week, obviously tonight's loss wasn't the most ideal situation, but we did see a new emergence out of this team that I really didn't expect to see at this time, which was Bam Adebayo hitting some three-pointers. Hit two of them tonight. First time in his career that he's ever hit two three-pointers in a single game. Obviously, had the game-winning three versus the Pistons, which shouldn't have taken a game-winning shot to win, but at the end of the day, it was still something that was very fun to see. But Marco, the hair's looking fresh, my man. We got to see Bam start to do what Heat fans have clamored for him to do for a very long time. What do you think incited him to take those shots, and what do you think are some of the effects that he can potentially have long term with him making some of those?
I don't know what honestly has happened for them to kind of push this. I mean, it hasn't been a big enough sample size of games for us to really say, is this a thing yet? It might just be, a little stretch here, but this kind of thing happened also with Chris Bosh in, the stage where he started shooting more threes. It was like you get a couple games here and there, it was like, oh, he's starting to shoot threes, but then it was that Boston series where it really kind of took off, where he was shooting, threes every game pretty much. The Bam thing, I'm really curious to see how long this keeps up and the kind of threes he'll take, for 2 years I've been saying above the break threes should be his thing. Corner threes aren't going to do him, it'll be fine to have, if he hits the corner three, that's good, but the above the break threes are bigger for a guy like him, for in general, guys that are, that play the five position that shoot the three, they normally take the above the break threes. You got your Brook Lopez, your Marc Gasols, guys like that. They started their careers, starting to shoot the above the break threes before they got to the corners, if they even really shot corner threes. Because Marc Gasol never really shot those, but they opened up his game more because guys would start, coming out a little harder to the 3-point line on that side, and that would open up more vertical spacing, which was the thing I've always harped on. Was if you give Bam a lane like that, and he's a good decision maker, on a 3-on-4 or a 2-on-1, he can make the right decision. He knows how to play out of that because he's pretty much done that his whole career, playing that Draymond role for Miami. If you give him even more opportunities like that, he's going to take advantage of them, hopefully. So that's been a thing I've always talked about, is the vertical spacing, him allowing him to work in more space. And, maybe that'll help guys like Jimmy, Tyler, like that. That's the stuff I really hope to see. I don't know. He might ramp it up in the playoffs, but I like that he's finally taking the steps of shooting those threes.
Yeah, I mean, when it's coming down to getting this close to the playoffs, you want to see players start to evolve their game, at least to start adding some wrinkles. What's going on, Bryce? Hope you're doing well in the comments. But, you want to see players continue to add wrinkles to their game come playoff time. And, with him and Jimmy, the biggest thing when it comes to their two-man game is it's really not been there, right? We've seen it in flashes, we've seen it in bursts, but with maybe a Jimmy coming off and cutting to the rim where you have like a pick and pop situation where Bam can actually float out to the 3-point line. And obviously, this is long term thinking, but that could be something that could potentially allow for that two-man game just to become a little more effective as far as what we can see out of it. So, Matt, I'll ask you the same question, maybe allow you to build off of what Marco said. What do you think allowed Bam? And obviously tonight he took two 3-point shots, making both of them. Do you think this is something that we will continue to see going into the playoffs with what he's done over the last week?
I want to say Ethan said this in the past, that Spo has been open about Bam shooting the above the break three, like him being okay with it, him being fine with it. But I don't know if Bam trusted himself to do it. I also don't know if the coaching staff fully entrusted him to do it. And I think now we're seeing them mutually building that trust. And obviously, I don't expect him to continue shooting 100% from three, but I expect the volume to at least tick up a little bit more. I don't know how much more. I don't know if he's going to sustain a 3-point attempt per game. But I think we're going to see him shooting it more, or him being willing to shoot it more, because he's seen himself make it. Obviously, we saw him with the game winner make it. We saw him step back for corner three tonight and then shooting above the break three in the second half. Like I think he's building his own confidence in that way, but I don't think it's going to be out of control to where it's like he's shooting 3, 4, 5 a game. Like I don't think it's ever going to get that crazy, with not at least in the short term. Maybe in the long term, 3 or 4 years down the line. But I think we're going to see him starting to shoot it more, just because I think they trust him to shoot it and they're okay with him shooting it if it's in rhythm, of course. And I think he's more willing to do it because he trusts himself to do it. And that's really important. If you're not trusting your own shot, you're most likely not going to make a high percentage of them. So I think those two keys are really important for him, not just the rest of the season, but him over the next year or two in terms of how he's going to be able to develop this part of his game.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, confidence is such a huge part of it. I mean, we've seen Bam hit game winners. I mean, this guy is very clutch. I mean, against Brooklyn, obviously recently against, Detroit, and when you hit a shot like that against a team and it's in a game-winning situation, you hit a three-point shot, then you start feeling a lot more comfortable, right? I think with Bam, even for him to start taking those mid-range shots that we clamor for him to take, he wasn't taking as much of those until, he started maybe getting and feeling some more comfort with that. So, Gad, let's get into some of that wishful thinking. Let's get into 2-3 years down the line, right? Tonight this week, what we saw from Bam could potentially add a new wrinkle to his game down the line that we haven't projected previously, right? If Bam continues to develop this three-point shot and continues to add that as a wrinkle to his game, 2-3 years down the line, how do you see that, implementing into how his offensive threat could be as a player and maybe his ceiling that we previously had of him?
Yeah, I mean, I think Marco really alluded to it. Like that's something that he can kind of build his game out from there, because you've got the mid-range game in your bag. You have some self-creation in that regard. I think the driving and the post-ups have also gotten better this year, but I think the driving and the finishing through contact or like scoring kind of going towards the basket is still a little iffy. But if you have people closing out 20 feet from the rim as opposed to 10 feet from the rim, then that can change the math defensively as well, especially considering how athletic Bam is and how gifted he is athletically for some of the bigger players in the NBA. So you turn that into the ability to attack closeouts, and then you parlay that with kind of some improvements in terms of dribbling through contact, finishing through contact, kind of giving someone a shoulder before you get to the rim. And you start to see the progression of someone who maybe, hey, like this could be someone who goes from playing like Bam Adebayo plays right now to maybe a little bit closer to like a Pascal Siakam in the half court, where he really can dominate 1 and 2 levels, which would be the rim and the mid range. And then, obviously you don't want to rely on the three, but he can hit it if you give it to him wide open sometimes. And that would be fantastic. I think anything more than that, I mean, you'd really be trending towards, I know Marco said Brook Lopez. Another player that comes to mind would be Al Horford. Someone who kind of just added that three-point shot to his game. I think long-term, that would be sort of one of the archetypes that Bam could fulfill offensively. I think defensively, similar, but Bam is better, of course. But yeah, I think the three-point shot can definitely help, man. Like, it does not hurt by any means. And if the fact that, like Matt said, he's building confidence a little bit now, you could really look to, let's say, next year, like, they could get in the lab this offseason, like, hey, let's start improving the three and then see what it looks like when you're taking 1, maybe 1.5, maybe 2 attempts a game next year or the year following. Fun development. It's been fun to watch. Obviously, the team hasn't been as successful, but listen, man, a lot of people beg for Bam threes. We're getting them so far for the last couple games, and that alone has made this week a lot more watchable than it would have been had we not gotten Bam threes, because then we could be talking about them losing to Detroit as well, but that's neither here nor there.
Absolutely. Like you said, just watching the development in itself has been something to enjoy. But let's bring it back to this Heat season and this Heat team, right? With the obviously amount of injuries that we've seen and not having Jimmy Butler, unsure of when Tyler Hero is coming back, I want to go into this playoff stretch that we have. Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo are clear number 1 and 2 best players on their team. But defensively and offensively, we have a couple of players that can do a lot of things. Obviously, Duncan Robinson finding his stride. Caleb Martin tonight doing some incredible things defensively. And even though he wasn't getting some calls at the rim, he was still, doing his best job to attack as much as he absolutely can. I mean, you have guys like Terry Rozier, had a really good fourth quarter tonight as well that we brought in. But I want to talk to you about the three players that are most important on this Heat team outside of Jimmy and Bam going into this playoff stretch. So, Gad, you finished last time. I want you to start this time. Going into the playoffs or going into, deep into the season and into the playoffs, outside of those two guys, who would be Van Lee? I got you there. Who would be the top three guys after Jimmy and Bam going into this playoffs?
Oh man, why does this question feel harder than it should be? I feel like we have seen some semblance of a resurgence in Caleb Martin, to the point where I think he's very close to being in this conversation, but I'll leave him as an honorable mention. So the question here is not who's the best, but who's the most important, because I think those are kind of
correct. Most important top three outside of Jimmy and Bam.
Most important. Okay, so I'll say number one is Duncan Robinson. Honestly, I think Duncan Robinson playing at least an adequate level on defense and really being a weapon offensively, fitting perfectly next to Jimmy and Bam that's super important for this team, man. Like from what we've seen with these players be so far this season, I think Duncan Robinson in the role that he's been asked to play is the most important. I don't think he's the best of the bunch. I honestly think he's the worst of the trio, but that's totally fine. I think Duncan Robinson's the most important. I will say second will be Terry Rozier, because the Heat have shown year in and year out in these playoff runs that they still need good ball handling, and they need someone who can play make outside of Jimmy and Bam. I think Terry Rozier having that ability is going to be really important. I think there's also going to be really important moments for him to say, yes, it's time for me to take over and score the ball. Also, there's going to be really important moments, which I wish he would have done a little bit down the stretch tonight, where he's going to say, you know what, let me get it to the guys who are better, like Jimmy and Bam. If he's able to toggle between playmaker and scorer, I think that really changes the dynamic for the Heat's offense. And then Tyler Hero, I know it's a hot take. I still think he's a really good player right now. I think he can help this team a lot. Like, I watch Patty Mills. I watch what Jay Rich was doing for this team at some point this season. And maybe he's not been in the most optimal role for him or the most optimal role for the team, but I think he's tried his hardest. I think he's a really good player. He's a damn good volume shooter, which is wildly important. And he's someone who has more, he's not a one-trick pony per se. There's other things that he can bring to the offense in terms of playmaking, in terms of mid-range, maybe sometimes attacking closeouts and getting to the rim as well, or hitting a floater. And he can just get hot, man. Like Tyler Hero getting hot, I think that can really help things. So I think with all of his injury history this year, he's been less important. And I will give the nod to Duncan and Terry, but I think Tyler is still definitely a really big part of this team if they want to make some noise come playoff time, because I don't think the rest of the team is good enough defensively to really outweigh anything else. So I think Tyler's offense is going to be crucial.
Yeah, we're definitely going to need his offense. Like you said, hopefully Terry, with not knowing how long Tyler's going to be out for, hopefully Terry can carry that volume shooter role and kind of step up and continue with that. I definitely agree with you with where your take is with Duncan. Matt, going to let you share your thoughts. Top three most important players on this Heat team going into the playoffs outside of Jimmy and Bam.
I was going to, my exercise is going to be, assuming Tyler's not there, just because.
Yeah, fair. Go ahead.
And because we don't know when he's going to be back.
That's a great point. We don't.
No one really knows when he's going to be back. Number three on my list, I'm aligned with Gad in terms of Rozier and Duncan. Those are two of my most important. Again, Terry, because he's a guy who can get to the rim. We haven't really seen that. He can bend a defense and he can get to the rim in a way that we haven't had. No disrespect to Kyle Lowry, but he just wasn't that guy with the Heat, or at least he wasn't that guy consistently enough. There are some times with Terry Rozier where okay, yeah, you want him to be a little bit more aggressive, but there are times he's very good taking care of the ball, toggling between that playmaker and scorer. I think is really important to Gad's point. And then Duncan Robinson, just because of the spacing that he provides and the gravity that he inflicts on a defense, because even when he's not completely making his shot or getting enough touches, he helps like Bam Adebayo. He helps Jimmy Butler space the floor a little bit, especially when he's one pass away and they're trying to get to the rim. He does all that different types of things while moving, while screening, while passing. Like he can now leverage his shooting into playmaking when he's like one of Miami's best passers. And so he's important in that aspect. And then number one on my list is Kevin Love, because there's not a sustainable backup big behind Bam Adebayo. And that's a problem, especially when you're in a playoff rotation. Like we saw so many times last year where Cody Zeller would lose Miami minutes in these playoff situations. And like, yeah, you're not going to be playing Cody Zeller. You're not going to be playing Kevin Love, I don't know, a ton of minutes behind Bam. Like, but you can stagger those minutes a little bit. Like, even if you start Kevin next to Bam, hypothetically, you can stagger that to where Bam or where Kevin is that backup big. And so you're not having to play Thomas Bryant, who has been fine lately, but I don't expect that to carry to a playoff rotation. And Orlando Robinson. Like, the Heat don't have a big behind Bam Adebayo, and that's a big problem. And Kevin Love has been really, really, really good this year. And assuming he is healthy, I think he's probably the most important player just from an impact standpoint. And so those minutes don't completely crater for a 10 to 15-minute sample like they did at times last year, especially in Game 5 of the Finals in the fourth quarter when they lost those minutes and they ultimately lost that game in the series.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point there. Kevin Love, obviously, haven't seen him as much, but when it comes to having someone that knows where to be on the defensive end, maybe isn't the most athletic guy, but knows where to be defensively. I mean, his touchdown passes are a staple of Kevin Love, can create 2 or 3 extra possessions or 2 or 3 extra baskets per game, right? And obviously, he's just got so much good skill all around for being that veteran leader overall. I think that's a great point, Matt. That was something definitely slept on. It was kind of like the sleeper answer for that one, but I definitely agree with you. I think, if I would have to rank him, I'd probably still throw Duncan as number 1, just because you need that guy to still space around Jimmy and Bam. But when you're talking about saving those minutes that Bam is gonna have to need to take off at some point, whether it's 6 to 8 minutes for allowing him to play 40, 42 minutes a game in a playoff series, you can't have a situation where Thomas Bryant is losing you or going -7, -8 in 8 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, you just can't have that happen. I don't care how much times you fall to the ground, Thomas. You're not going to get a foul called. Marco, back in here. Top 3 players that are most important outside of Jimmy and Bam. And you're on mute, buddy. So let me unmute for you. There you go. You're good. I got you.
Thank you.
Oh, never mind. Yep.
So I like that Matt mentioned Kevin, because he's my number 3 because of the backup big situation being what it is. And I remember also the Cody Zeller minutes, because those are rough. And I think Miami this year is more equipped to handle the backup 5 minutes with Kevin, but without him, it's going to be rough. And he's going to be playing, like Eric Spoelstra is probably going to play Haywood Highsmith at the 5 sometimes, because even last year you saw those minutes here and there whenever Cody was just not giving them anything. And number 2, I actually have Duncan as my number 2. I expected him to be number 1, but honestly, I think the addition of Terry is kind of too important for that. Terry is the one guy that can win you more than just a game. He might win you a series depending on how hot he gets, and that's been the case for a guy like Tyler. That's why I don't have Tyler on here, because he's too much the same kind of guy as Terry. Terry and Tyler are kind of the same player, and I just don't know if I expect Tyler to be out there. With Terry, I expect him to play. He's been, the healthier guy for the past couple of years. He just turned 30, but, you still have a guy that's been in the playoffs before. Tyler's played one healthy playoffs all his career, and that's just the facts at this point. So I think Terry's the one guy that I think can win them a series, and outside of Bam and Jimmy, he can be that Caleb Martin role where he just kind of goes off, and you are somehow on the road winning against like the Cavs or something for Game 7. That's the type of player he is, and he's like Matt said, he's a rim pressure kind of guy that Miami just doesn't have. And what's funny about him is I feel the opposite about him as I do with Tyler in terms of catch and shoot threes. He somehow is a bad catch and shoot guy, but off the dribble he's money, which I don't know how that makes any sense. But some guys just like shooting off the dribble. I think but yeah, that's my thing. Is I just somehow think Terry can win them a series, and whether that's in the first round, second round, whatever, I just think he's ignitable to where he puts fear in the other team's eyes, and that's kind of rare for a guy that's on this team that's not Jimmy or Bam. Like Tyler, for as good as he is, I just don't think he puts that kind of fear on other teams. He might get hot here and there, but I think Terry's just a different kind of animal that Miami really hasn't had in this era of the Heat. With Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, and I mean, I know people are in the comments are saying, he wouldn't do a series. You have to realize you're not asking for Terry to win you a series as a 1A guy. This is Terry Rozier that's going to be filling the gaps between when Jimmy Butler is doing what Jimmy Butler is doing in the playoffs. So that's how Terry Rozier will win you a series, is when Jimmy Butler is still being Jimmy Butler, but now you have a Terry Rozier to add on top of that. That's the offensive firepower. When Bam is having to do everything defensively and you need a guy behind Jimmy that can get buckets, that's going to be the guy. We haven't had Tyler Hero to do that healthy in the playoffs in a long time. So, yeah, that's how Terry could potentially win you a series. So appreciate you spitting some fire, Marco. But let's get into these next week predictions for the Miami Heat. So with this team coming up on Wednesday, we have the Cleveland Cavaliers. Friday, we have the New Orleans Pelicans, and then we also have the Cavs again on Sunday. So we'll go over those three games. We got Cavs, Pelicans, and Cavs again. I think, Matt, you haven't started a topic yet, so I'll let you start off on predictions this time. Predictions for the next three games on how do you think we do?
I'm going to say 2-1. I think they win one of those Cleveland games, and then they beat New Orleans. It's been so weird with this team, just how streaky they've been. I know they lost tonight, but so far this calendar year already, we've seen them win 5 of 7 games, and then they lose 7 straight games, and then they lose 11 or then they win 11 of 14 games, and then they have a 4-game losing streak, and then they win these 2 games. It's just like this team's been so unbelievably streaky. I still think they keep their winning ways at least for a little bit longer. At least it would be better for the standings, and obviously they're fighting between Orlando and Indiana, or not Orlando and Indiana, Philadelphia and Indiana. Orlando's a little bit ahead of them, but I think they go 2-1 over the stretch.
Gad?
I fully agree with every single thing Matt just said. Just tally me on that as well. I think they get one of the Cleveland games. Most likely, I'll say they get the Wednesday game, which is going to be weird because they win in Cleveland, beat New Orleans, and then probably lose at home against Cleveland on Saturday to piss everybody off. But that's Heat culture right there.
That's Heat culture. When you win, you're not supposed to, and you lose when you're not supposed to. So, Marco, what you feeling about these next 3 games?
I'm gonna get weird with it. I'm gonna say they sweep the Cavs this week and they lose against the Pelicans, which is a funnier way to go 2-1. And that sparks a whole lot of discourse about do they want to see Miami in the first round? Which I don't even think they do want to see them in the first round. I think Miami would prefer actually to see Cleveland, especially after last year against the Knicks, whatever happened there. I think Max Strus is out. So, yeah. I think Max Strus is out with an injury, so I don't think he'll play in either of those games, which, it'll suck not to see him give the middle finger to Jimmy. But that also all depends on if Jimmy plays, because, if Jimmy's out there, I give Miami way more of a shot to maybe even sweep the week. But, I'm going to get weird with it. I just want the discourse to happen after this week. Be like, are the Cavs scared of the Heat? Which, I think ESPN will run with that for maybe a minute on first take. Who cares?
Yeah, probably not. But, Family's saying Strus, Mobley, and Mitchell are all out. So wow, yeah, it seems like we'll be playing a depleted Cavs team. So expect that to be another clutch game as well. But yeah, definitely. Obviously, I want to give a crazy shout out to Max Strus. I know this is a couple weeks late, but did y'all see that 3-quarter short shot at the buzzer? One of the craziest things. We haven't seen too many Heat players go on another team after being one of those guys that stepped up as an undrafted player. But I think Max has probably played one of the best out of all those guys. Talking Gabe, Hassan, Rodney Magruder, all those guys. Max has definitely been playing out of all the guys. I think he's picked up and continued on the best. So props to that guy as well. But I agree with all you guys. I think 2-1 is the most realistic record. I'm hoping to see just health at this point. Like all I want to see is this team just to start to get healthy. Duncan had to leave tonight. He tweaked his back. I mean, you saw Terry Rozier. He was grabbing his wrist. I know Caleb was getting his forearm wrapped up as well. This team is banged up, but I mean, when it comes to this late in the season, a lot of teams are. I mean, you look at, like we said, what Van Lee said with the Cavs, Strus, Mobley, and Mitchell are out, right? So we're going to have to keep rolling with the punches. We'll have to see what Coach Spo can draw up. I do not like seeing Patty Mills, like Jermaine say, playing 20 minutes out there. I don't see that. But I mean, when you don't have Tyler Hero, you don't have Duncan Robinson, you don't have Jay Rich, you don't have anybody else. Essentially, it's just hard. Who else do you play in the backcourt anyway? So, 2-1. In the panel, Matt, Gad, Marco, appreciate y'all for joining us as always. And as if everything, you guys know, keep it locked in here on 5 Reasons. Make sure you guys make sure you guys follow us on all the streams, follow us on Twitter, X, whatever it may be. But we'll catch you guys after next week. And as always, let's go Heat.